Good morning. Good morning and welcome to Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. I'm Bruce Golding. We're in a different time slot today, certainly a different time slot here in Jamaica. We're starting at 12 noon instead of 11. Really to synchronize with New York because they changed time last night. They came off daylight saving time. So we're linking with them at 1 o'clock instead of noon our time. And at 1 o'clock we're going to welcome all our listeners from the New York area and beyond through Irish Jam. I want to welcome you once again. Thank you for joining me on this program. I hope you had a good weekend, and I hope you are primed and ready for a good week, a productive week, an enjoyable week. One of the dreams that many Jamaicans have is to own a home, to have your own a door key. It means a lot to them. You know, to have a roof over your head, your own roof, so that you don't have to worry about the landlord raising the rent or giving you notice. And if you happen to be squatting on land that doesn't belong to you, you don't have to be worried about the bulldozer coming to mash you down. And owning a home gives you leverage, economic power. You can use that home to get a loan to start a business, to send your children to university, or tide you over if you have an expensive emergency. But for many Jamaicans, the question is this a dream, or is it a fleeting illusion? Many Jamaicans have resorted to squatting, finding a piece of idle land somewhere and putting up a little something on it. Sometimes out of concrete, most times a little board house. It is estimated that there are over 700 squatter settlements in Jamaica, on which 20% of the Jamaican population, that's over 500,000 people, are living. Some of these settlements are in dangerous locations, like on the edge of a gully bank or a river bank. And you know, you don't need a hurricane, you only need some heavy rains to wash you away. Wash you and the house and everything away. According to the National Housing Policy, the draft National Housing Policy, which was presented in 2019, we have had national housing policies before, but the latest one was a draft that was prepared. I don't know if it has been confirmed and approved, but a draft was presented in 2019. And according to that policy, we would need to build around 17,000 houses, new houses a year, over a 20-year period. That is a total of 340,000 houses over those 20 years, in order to satisfy the demand for housing, which would include replacing dilapidated housing that, falling down. 17,000 a year. We're currently building about 11,000 a year. Less than half of that is being built through the government, through agencies like the National Housing Trust, the Housing Agency of Jamaica. And the greater portion is being built by the private sector and by people themselves. Private sector meaning, housing developers, private developers who go and build houses and put them up for sale. But a lot of those 11,000 houses that are being built each year are being built by individuals themselves, sometimes small people. Individuals who save up some money, buy a little piece of land, or maybe they find, that maybe they have family land. And they put up something. Sometimes just a one room, but with the plan that as they get a little more money, they will put on an extra room and put on a veranda and so on. This means that at 11,000 houses being built a year, we are running a shortfall of about 6,000 each year. And if that remains constant, we will end up at the end of the 20-year projected period. We will still end up with a shortfall of around 120,000 houses. One of the biggest obstacles to owning a home is affordability. Building materials are expensive. A bag of cement is now costing over $1,200. If you buy 100 blocks, you better shell out about $15,000 for that. A length of half-inch steel will cost you around $1,850. So you're talking about expensive stuff. Talking about a lot of cost to build a house. So the demand for housing is one thing, but effective demand is quite another. Effective demand means that you not only need a house, but you can afford to pay for it. Not necessarily by cash. Very, very few people in Jamaica. I mean, the middle class people can't do it. Very few people in Jamaica are able to just draw a check and pay for a house, or count out some cash. But effective demand means you not only need the house, but you're able to pay for it, even if you have to pay for it through a long-term mortgage, over 15 or 20 years. There are many people who just can't manage that. Take a household helper or a day's worker or a roadside vendor, see those most times women on the roadside, and have the boxes and baskets with goods and they're selling and so on. They probably earn, certainly in terms of the household helpers, suppose they earn between $12,000, $15,000 a week, if as much. Out of that helper has to buy food, has to buy clothes, has to send the children to school, has to buy medicine because they will get sick. She has to pay the light bill. By the time she's finished all of that, there's hardly anything that can be left to pay any mortgage. But she's likely to be paying rent because she lives somewhere. And the somewhere that she lives belongs to somebody else, and more than likely she has to be paying some rent for that place, however small it may be. The question that I want to pose is, can we find a housing solution where that rent money, small as it is, could be used to pay a mortgage for a house that she can afford over the 15, 20 years? A house that is hers, where she doesn't have to get into a quarrel every month with the landlord, where nobody can come and push her out of the house, where she can go to bed at night and have a good night's sleep. And Proper housing is important, not just for the individual, but for the country. Owning a house provides a more stable environment for raising a family. The mother, the father, the children themselves feel more secure. They can sleep more comfortably at night. The children can focus on their homework better. They develop a better sense of belonging because they belong somewhere in the house that they own. Better families lead to better communities, and better communities lead to a better nation. But for many Jamaicans, the dream of owning a home seems to be nothing more than a pipe dream. How can we address this situation? How can we tackle this national problem? Because that's what it is. What new thinking, what creative ideas can we find so that the dream of owning a home can be fulfilled instead of remaining just a fleeting illusion? This is the challenge we're going to be discussing today. You know, Jamaica Live tries to analyze issues, increase understanding, and find solutions. That's what we're about. And that's what we will set about today. So we're going to be talking with some people who are far more knowledgeable in these matters than I am, and people who I think can help us to understand not just the dimensions of the problem, but who can help us to find a way to give new life to that dream of owning a home. When we come back. Welcome back. Jamaica Live on the Bridge 99. I'm Bruce Goulding. We're talking housing today. We're talking about the dream of owning your own house. A dream which for so many seems to be beyond not only their grasp but beyond their reach. And we want to see if there is a way that we can address that. If there's a way we can bring that dream closer to reality for so many of the people, particularly people in the low-income bracket. And we're pleased to be joined now by Mr. Howard Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell is a former chairman of the National Housing Trust. So he has had to deal with these questions, these challenges over a period of time. But for me, more importantly, is that he's a thinker, has a creative mind, a solution-seeking mind. Howard, welcome to the program. Do we have Mr. Mitchell online?
Hello.
Hello, Howard.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
You hearing me?
Yeah, man, I'm hearing you. I hope you are hearing me.
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
Good, thanks for joining me. Mr. Mitchell is also a former president of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, so he has worn many hats in the past. Howard, we want to talk today about housing. And I know you did your stint at the National Housing Trust, and I'm sure that while you were there, you had to agonize over the issue of the extent to which we are able, and by the we, I'm using the kind of broad we. I'm talking about government, private sector, everybody. The extent to which we are able to address the housing needs, if not the demand, of low-income people. Now, a number of persons have been critical of the NHT, and I was myself critical because I was under the impression that the Housing Trust represented, not for any fault of the board or the management of the Housing Trust, but that the Housing Trust represented a transfer of wealth from the rich to the poor. because I was always concerned that a lot of the contributors don't qualify, and therefore they don't get any benefit. But their contributions were used to finance mortgages for the higher income groups who qualify. But I saw some numbers recently coming out of a major study that was commissioned at the NHT, a copy of which I reviewed, which indicates that, for example, the people who earned, certainly up to 2017 when it was done, the people who earn under $7,500 a week, they represent almost half of the contributors to the trust. But in terms of the value of their contribution, that is only 11%, because they're low-wage people. And in terms of the mortgages, the value of mortgages that they benefited from, it was 12%. So it was out of line. If you take the next income group, for example, the people who earn between $7,500 and $10,000 a week, they contributed 6% of the value of the contributions that came into the trust. But in terms of the value of the mortgages that they obtained, it was 10%. So it would not be a fair criticism to say that you're taking poor people money to finance big people houses. But the question I want to put to you is, and I'm sure this is something that you have had to wrestle with, what are we going to do about those persons who don't qualify because their income there's no space left in their little wages to pay any mortgage? What is it that can be done to address their needs? Because they have to live somewhere. They have children to raise, no? What can we do?
Well, let me say two things. One is that just listening to you there with those figures, that while those numbers may vindicate the trust in terms of the responsibility to reach to those different cohorts, it doesn't take away from the fact that a great number of our low-income wage earners are unable to access housing. As a fact, there's no number that I have in my head, but I'm telling you that there are people who are maybe not even contributing to the trust, but who have no hope of buying a house because the price of houses in the current context today is just above their capacity. And you also have to understand that we have a squatting problem of over 800,000 people estimated to be squatters. And you put that within the context that you are not going to get private developers building low-income houses simply because the profit motive will not allow. And the fact that they need to replace their capital and they need to make a profit will not allow them to do it. So the problem is, how do you address that cohort? And as far as I'm concerned, we have to understand something. In a small island developing state, only the state is going to build low-income housing. So the trust, to the extent that we acknowledge that the original purpose of the trust was to satisfy the needs for people who could by no other means access housing, we have to find a way to restructure the housing trust, not just to be able to justify and say that, okay, it's 11% or whatever the percentage was of low-income wage earners who contribute, and they're getting a part of the houses too. But to say, how do we satisfy the genuine need, the genuine demand for housing in this country? At the time when I was there, it was 400,000 people who had effective demand for houses. It must be more than that now. How do we do it without building houses that are $15 million and up? Because those people
what are your thoughts, Howard? How do we do that?
I
have some thoughts I want to bounce off you, but I'd love to get your views.
I'm saying that you have to segregate a certain amount of that contribution, right, for a period of time, and it has to be used for the purpose of taking crown lands or empty lands, subdividing it, and creating lots and going back to a build on your own type thing. And I've been castigated for this before, but I'll use the term only, not because I was in favor of its implementation, but because of the idea, an Operation Pride type thing that allows people who don't have the initial capital, but who can go out and make the money, to get a place of their own and assist them to build within defined ways a house that is livable and meets code and that they can amplify over the years, they can build on over the years. There are also other creative ways, one more thing, of allowing people to live in houses without owning them. You know, you can have generational loans and that kind of thing. But I'm saying the major bump has to be that you cut up land and make people get it at a subsidized rate.
Well, your thoughts seem to be heading in the direction I wanted to invite you to go in. Couple of thoughts.
Maybe that means I'm right.
No, don't do me that. couple of things, right? When you look at the cost of a house, you're talking about the cost of land. You're talking about the cost of preparing that land. The surveys that have to be done to identify the lots and so on. You're talking about the infrastructure cost. All of those add up even before you lay the first concrete block. Then when you get into the construction now, even a modest unit, if you're even building a one bedroom with a toilet. 300
square feet.
Yeah.
300 square feet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you're talking about a lot of money. And then when you check to see now, all of those who can afford this, even if you stretch out this payment over 20 years at 2%, all of you who can afford it, come forward. Plenty of people are going to have to stay at the back because they can't come forward. Let me bounce some things off you. And I welcome the idea you expressed that in dealing with that income cohort, government has a responsibility, and her responsibility is not only to finance and facilitate, not only to facilitate, but I believe that the government is going to have a financial responsibility as well. Let me spell out my thinking. The government is still the largest landowner out there. You have lands. Some of them is agricultural land, some of them is resort-type development land. But you have a lot of land that could be put into housing. What would be wrong in a government policy that were to say, now look, for this income group, understand we're not making no speculators get near this, but for this income group, we are prepared to put the land in for zero cost. Because the alternative to that is for the land to remain as idle as it has been for the last 40 or 50 or 60 years. We put the land in at zero cost. We're going to have to survey the land because we're going to have to identify the boundaries, and people have to know exactly where the land begins and where it stops. We're going to have to put in some infrastructure, but we're not going to insist on putting in the kind of infrastructure that is required by the current planning regulations, where you have to have sidewalks and curb walls and so on. We're providing access so you know exactly where the roadway is. The roadway may not be paved. It may have some kind of surface dressing, but we can't afford to pave it. We have to put in water because you have to have water. And we have to look about your sanitation. But beyond that, we're giving you the basic rudiments of a housing scheme. And then we are going to assist you to build something. Now, even when you get to the assisting to build, there are all kind of options that you can look at. If you know that a lot of the informal sector, they build incrementally. They put up a one room, then they put on another room, and eventually over a period of time, it turns into a 5-bedroom house. We will structure our lending to you on that basis. So you're putting up the one room, here is the loan for that one room, and this is how you're going to pay for it over a period of time. And then when you're ready to put on the 2 rooms, provided you have been meeting your obligations, we're going to lend you some money to put on the 2nd room and so on. Am I talking nonsense?
No, and I want to put it within a context. I wanted to say one thing, to maybe just amend something you said. You said that the alternative of those lands is to leave them lying there. With respect, the alternative that occurs more often than not is for people to move on to those lands. The government is unable to protect it, and they squat and they create subhuman conditions, and they create havens for criminals, and they create cesspools of social deprivation. So that to me, it is quite clear that what we have to do is scribe out those lands, put in 2-inch mains, clear the road, as you said, metal, proper drainage, in a way that the infrastructure can be developed.
Over time.
And it must be done within a holistic planning way, that those places are near to to opportunities for people to do things. Now, where the private sector comes in, it is quite easy for you to say to a private sector man, I am developing lands at OEO, right, to put 400 people, and there is a piece of land which I am reserving. You can get it and put in a strip mall, or you can put in some amenities, or you can go and build a school which I will buy from you. Okay? Yes. So that you don't just drop the people down there without any facilities. The private sector can be used to provide those employment opportunities.
In a partnership.
In a partnership. So, for instance, St. John's Road, which you know very well, there's a lot of land on St. John's Road. The demographic there is crowded. There are people who are in the underground economy, which, by the way, is almost as large as the overground economy, and they don't have capital, but they have income. Cut out some lands there, scribe out the front of it, and say to the private sector, you can get this to do commercial, light industrial, BPO, whatever.
But this is what you have to do in exchange.
This is what you have to do in exchange.
You had promised me 15 minutes. I need 5 more minutes from you, but I need to take a break. Okay. Can I hold you?
Yes, I will.
All right, we take a break. We're talking housing today, particularly the affordability or unaffordability of housing. And we've been talking to Mr. Howard Mitchell, a former chairman of the National Housing Trust. Howard, you still with me?
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, during your time at the Housing Trust, was any study done, was any consideration given to shared equity mortgages? I mean, if a house is being built, if you look at the kind of numbers today, I'm not sure that you can still get them at, a studio at $4 or $5 million. But let's use a figure of $5 million. But my helper can't afford that. My gardener can't afford that. But they could afford to service a mortgage of $3 million. Was any consideration given to say, well, I'm going to sell you $3 million worth of the house, and I'm going to hold the other $2 million. And after a period of 10 years, then you have to enter into a new agreement with me to pay off the other $2 million. Was any thought given to that?
Yes, there were studies done on it. There was a proposal that was made. Unfortunately, you caused me to be removed before we could go forward with it. And I don't know what else, what happened to it. But we did look at the concept of sharing with the trust the equity obligation, and you would grow into, as your income increased, you would grow into the payments. So that is there, and we can probably get hold of somebody at the trust and develop it. There was also the concept of generational mortgages, where you could pass it on to your siblings or your children or whatever, and they could assume the liability and go through. These options are available. They're not hard to do, but let me tell you something. You cannot get a place now for $5 million. That's the problem. And unless you find a way to bring that down, that cost down, and do it by not putting people in the wilderness where they can't earn money, and the transportation cost negates the advantage given by the low price of the house, you're going to have another problem again.
Yes.
So it has. I think the issue of housing in Jamaica is up there, maybe not as a priority as much as education and health and public health, but it's up there as one of the priorities we have to address. Too many people are going homeless.
Yes.
And a home, and the government is beginning to address this issue of titling, which brings the asset value to you that you can use. But given that we're a low-wage economy, right, we need to find a way, while we grow the productive side and increase the wages, we need to find a way for people to get access to a roof over their head. And the shared equity is one of those.
Yes. And you also alluded to, and I think it's what I understand to be graduated mortgages, where you...
The graduated mortgage. Yeah. I seem to remember that trust actually started to pilot thing on that, and actually may have done a couple of those. I don't know. You'd have to grab somebody from the National Housing Trust, probably in the research area, and make them tell you about that. But the trust has to be redefined, Bruce. The trust has to be redefined. It cannot continue the way it is.
Did you have a chance to look at that 2017 Commission report?
No, I didn't.
It would be useful if you did. It's a very long report, 100 and odd pages.
It's on the website?
It's on the website, yes. It's on the website. It has some useful things in it. I was a little disappointed that I didn't think that it ended up with the kind of creative, innovative solutions that I would have hoped. But it did point some directions, and it's something that perhaps we need to pick up on. The problem with these things, of course, Howard, and from my own experience as government, a lot of work went into it. I mean, it's quite obvious when I read it. But I'm not sure.
I think Nigel Clark initiated that.
It was done by Nigel Clark when he was chairman.
Right.
Yeah.
And I participated in some discussions on that. And I was really heartened by the direction it was taken.
Yeah, but the problem with these things is that very often they end up, you roll them up and use them catch table foot, instead of really taking them seriously.
Perhaps you should agitate first to make that study a matter for public discussion, because housing is critical. There's so many young people out there who don't have the stability of a house.
It is. I want to thank you very much for joining me today, Howard. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure, sir. Good to hear you.
You've been very helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
We're going to be joined now by another key functionary in the housing delivery area, and that is Mr. Norman Brown. Norman Brown is the chairman of the Housing Agency of Jamaica, which is another government entity that is mandated and tasked to assist in addressing the problem of housing and affordability. Norman, do I have you on the line?
Yes, sir. Morning. Morning to everyone on your listening.
Good. Thank you very, very much for joining us. But a lot of the listeners may be confused as to what is the difference between the National Housing Trust and the Housing Agency of Jamaica in terms of their role, their mandate. Can you clear us up on that?
All right. Somewhat. We have two core business and mandates. One is that we are housing developers. We play a role in developing the affordable income market, and by affordable, the number keeps moving, but right now we're at about 8 million. That's where we are for what is defined as affordable, 8 million or less. And also, we are the entity who will bear most of the responsibility for the informal communities across the country, such as the Farmer Operation Pride site. Presently, I think we have over 100 of those. Spread right across, almost in every parish across the country. So those are the two things that we do. I think the housing trust provide like mortgage financing and those things which we don't. We don't have that ability.
But you're one of the developers for the housing trust. Is that true?
We do at times do joint ventures with the housing trust.
Yes.
But we don't work like do projects for them per se. But we work on joint venture in ventures at times.
But you don't provide mortgage financing, do you?
No. When I went to HAJ as a director, there was a mortgage component to our operations. It was sold to the NHT a few years back, but that was only confined to the Greater Portmore development.
Well, let me ask you a question now, Norman.
Yes, sir.
Take a typical helper or a typical gardener. Let us say that they earn, some weeks it may be up, some weeks it may be down. But let us say they earn $12,000 a week.
Yes.
They can't afford any of what you're talking about. What's going to happen to them? Who's going to house them? How are they going to get a roof over their head?
All right. It will be a challenge, sir. But I don't think it is impossible. As you know, the NHT do provide like joint mortgage applications. So two persons could do an application and probably qualify for a mortgage. I have known of persons who earn $16,000 per week, and they have gotten 100% financing from NHT, and they pay about $22,000 a month, I think. So there are ways that it can be done, but it is indeed a challenge. It is a very difficult one.
Well, let me provoke your mind a bit, because I just concluded a discussion with Mr. Howard Mitchell, who is a former chairman of the Housing Trust, and we were sort of canvassing options.
Yes.
Let me provoke your mind. I know you are from St. James, Montego Bay.
Yes, sir.
And that's an area that has faced some serious challenges when it comes to housing and
we
squatting.
We have in excess of 21 informal communities, some with as much as 4,000 houses.
All right. Let me provoke your mind a little bit, and I'm anxious to hear your response.
Yes.
Let us say that in St. James, with all the pressure that St. James is coming under, people, we have a lot of hotels there, so people are descending on Montego Bay in the hope of finding a job or earning something off tourism.
Yes.
The government has some lands in St. James. There's a whole heap of lands in St. James.
Yes.
Let us say that the government were to say to you, hey, Mr. Norman Brown, chairman of HAJ, you come forward here. Here is 200 acres of land. We need to find some housing for some people because they're squatting all over the place.
Yes.
Here is the land. The cost of the land is zero. We're not putting any cost on the land.
Right.
We want you as housing agents to go in and put in some rudimentary infrastructure. We're not talking about, 14-foot wide paved roads with curb walls and sidewalks. We're talking about rudiment, because people have to have access and they need to know exactly where their piece of land begins and where it ends. So you're going to have to employ some surveyors. You have to survey it. You have to, lot it out.
Yes.
You're going to put in some basic infrastructure, which must include drainage, because you can't afford for the people to be flooded out.
Right.
It has some kind of surface dressing, but is not asphalt.
Right.
It has to have water because the people must have water. So you have to run the 2-inch main or whatever it is. You have to look at sewage disposal to see what is the best means of providing sewage disposal. That infrastructure, in order for it to come to the standard that I enjoy where I live in Barbican, is something that will have to be done over time, over years. But we want to start you off. So we have the surveys, so we can give you the title. And housing agency, we want you to do that. And then now, you say to those people who are descending on Montego Bay, come forward. Those of you who can jump around and build something for yourself, here is the lot. Maybe you're a mason, maybe your brother is a mason, maybe you have children abroad that can send some money and you go buy some materials. If you can't do it for yourself, government is prepared to provide you with some assistance through housing trust or whatever, where we do it incrementally. So you start with a 1 room now, and we lend you enough money to build the 1 room. And if you do that successfully and you are paying off that mortgage for the 1 room, we'll give you another mortgage on top of that first mortgage for the 2nd room and the 3rd room.
Yes.
Does that make sense, Norman, or am I talking rubbish?
It's challenging, sir, because what you have just laid out is somewhat of a kind of a hybrid operation pride.
Yes, and I'm prepared to acknowledge that and recognize that.
Right. But historically it has not worked very well to the benefit of the resident. But
Why?
what we find out now is that they end up in communities that are severely underdeveloped. I mean, you let us say you and I would be 2 of those persons. So you have a little more resources than me. You build up your house next door, you get to 2 rooms and so on. But I don't have the money yet. You see the lot beside you? It mushrooms into almost a mini forest. So when you come home at night, you don't know if a criminal is in there hiding, or it's just that it leaves the community in a very unfinished state.
What's the alternative? What's the alternative for people to go squat on it?
No, the alternative for us is that the lands that are available, we should move forward to develop them in a meaningful way and quickly.
But Norman, you're going to end up at 7 million. Your helper can't afford that.
No. what I'm saying to you, they're in my mind, and I don't want to stay too far from my remit, but in my mind, a policy decision needs to be looked at where the cost of the land is a component. But I would say this to you, Mr. Golden, the cost of the land cost in a development is almost at maximum 20%. You know, what is in my experience, what is the most challenging aspect? You know, is the whole infrastructure development. You know, because when you're selling the house for, all right, there's a development we're doing in Catching Estate right now, right? And the houses they were originally scheduled for 6.9, but the project was delayed for a number of years, and so it inflation and the cost of the inputs have gone up. But when you look at the size of that house and the cost, the infrastructure cost is probably almost 50% of it. And this is on flat land.
Yes.
So if the land is elevated, it is even higher.
Well, we need to look at that. That's what I'm saying. But then what you were suggesting a while ago is that that's going to lead to underdeveloped communities.
Yes.
But the problem with that, Norman, is that if you don't do that, what you end up with is squatter communities. So it's a question of which one you prefer. You prefer some orderly but undeveloped communities, or you prefer squatter communities?
Most certainly orderly communities. But let me give you the options, and let us choose one of the communities in Montego Bay. Let us look at retirement. Retirement, as it is now, as I think it's phase 2, we have about 2,000 lots, and most of those lots are unoccupied. There's some scribing of roads, but it's not. You wouldn't call them roads. It's more paths, because they are not. There's no drainage or nothing like that. If HAG is empowered with the resources to install some level of infrastructure, we would have to sit with NEPA, because there's a minimum standard that they go before they approve.
We're going to be talking to them later on today, and I want to discuss with them that minimum and whether we couldn't minimize that minimum a little further. I will. That is a question that needs to be asked. To be honest with you,
one
of the things that concern me, Mr. Norman, is that there is an initiative and a resourcefulness in our people that we are not giving sufficient facility to.
Yes.
Talking about St. James as well. Well, many years ago, when I was Minister of Construction, and you know how long ago that was.
Yes.
In order to help to address the housing problem in St. James, the ministry went and negotiated to purchase 100 acres of land from Mr. Carr-Jarrett.
Yes.
It took about 4 months for the title to be transferred. And by the time, shortly after the title was transferred, and I am down in Montego Bay looking at housing projects, when I went to look at the 100 acres of land that I thought we had ready now to develop, I could hardly find a square inch of land on it that was not occupied.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then in a matter of a couple of months, when I look and see what the people were doing on the land, they were putting up some houses that if you were able to lift up those houses and move them to Bourg Heights or Coral Gardens,
they would be.
You demand big money for them, right?
Yes, that's true.
So,
that's true.
Are we doing enough to unleash that kind of resourcefulness?
I don't think we are doing enough. I would say to you, this administration, of which the HAJ falls under their management, they have made a commitment to have 70,000 housing starts over the next, I think it's 5 years during the tenure. And HAJ is our aspiration is we are allotted 14,000 of those. So far we have identified and we have under construction at least 7,000 of those. So we are now seeking adequate land. I think a part of the challenge for us as a country is that historically the state is always lagging behind the development. And one of the approaches that we have taken for HAG and in Trelawny in particular, Trelawny is scheduled to have about 15,000 new hotel rooms over the next, I think, 8 years. We have now identified lands in Trelawny. We are in the Clarkstone area, and we are looking at building out at least 1,000 units up there, and we are working towards keeping them in the $8 million maximum. But these units are like a one-bedroom and a 3,000 square foot lot with all the amenities of a modern community.
Do you have any difficulty in selling them?
No, sir. No, sir. There's no difficulty in selling any of the products that we produce now. Currently, Minister, I'll give you an example, sir. We currently have a joint venture project in Rhine Park, building 700 houses. The first phase was completed, or the first phase went on the market in, I think, about maybe May, June. We had 162 units to be sold. Detached units, townhouses, for like $14.5 million in that price range. 600 persons turned up with the checks for those 100. So the demand for housing is a market that is super strong.
Yeah, but we'll come back to the problem that your helper was not one of those who turned up with a check.
And I am saying, sir, it is not far distant for her to get one. Why I said that to you? The housing trust has now, this government has brought in what you call an intergenerational mortgage. So even though the helper might not be able to move, or she alone can carry it, she can have one of her children on it.
Yes.
So the mortgage period can be stretched out further, and she could afford and have access to it.
Yes. Yes.
And what I know for certainty
is that actually in place now? And I remember the announcement was made.
I think so, sir. I think so. I think it's there. Now, I can't speak for the housing trust as a HAJ person, but I know, and we do work in conjunction with the HAJ, with the housing trust in terms of our brownfield communities at times.
Yes.
Because there is also a grant program that they have. So if you're in, for argument's sake, retirement, right, and you have your title from HHG, and you earn less than $12,000 a week, the housing trust will give you a grant of $2.5 million to complete or to start a house on the land.
Yeah, but
that is not money that you're going to pay back. It's a grant.
Yeah, but it's limited by allocation, no? In other words, not all who will can get one time.
No, but the take-up is not, from my understanding, housing trust is asking people to come, because apparently there's not, people don't know that it's there, that facility is around.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. But just going back to the needs and supplying the needs of our low income, because the Prime Minister has made it very clear to us, and Minister, my cap is $15 million. Him say I don't have any business in any market above $15 million.
Mm-hmm.
Him say that is for the private sector. So what we are trying to do now is to identify and to build a housing, something for 7 million, 7.5, 8 million, depending on the kind of infrastructure that we need to put in.
Yeah.
So that is where we are. And what we do, sir, our model now is to build you more or less a starter home. So you get a one-bedroom, living and dining, and you get a 3,000 square foot lot. Plus, we will sell you with a development plan. So after 2-3 years on your own, you end up with a 3-bedroom house in a proper community. That is the model that we are now pursuing.
Have you been called upon at HHA? Have you been called upon to address the problem of the inner city communities? An attempt was made. Are you there? Are you still there?
We have been, yes.
An attempt was made to address it through the inner city housing program. Yes. It was well intentioned, but in my view, was designed. The design had a lot of flaws in it, and it was not sustainable. But yes. how are we going to address that? You know, if you drive around Kingston, for example, or Spanish Town, Maypen, you see the evidence of the urban blight. You see the crowding, the density problem. How is that to be addressed?
Well, currently we are looking at 3 inner city urban renewal projects now. In the St. Andrew area, down in the Waterhouse, Penwood Road area. We are in discussion with a joint venture with the NHT. But when some of the surveys are done, the market for those areas, there has to be some consideration in terms of the cost, and I don't want to use the word subsidy, but I don't have a better word right now. But because the cost of putting up like a townhouse unit for under say $10 million is very challenging. But if we build out in those areas, we have to be able to sell and to at least recover the cost of building out there. So right now we are looking at the land that we have. The land cost is not going to even. You're not going to put the full value of the cost in the final sale price. But it is something that we are addressing. I would say to you, sir, downtown, like Carver Street and those places, we have attempted to buy out some of those rundown areas, the buildings where the buildings are abandoned and so on. Everything has now been taken up, so there's nothing down there we could buy to even start urban renewal downtown. Because all of those have now become prime property.
I mean, when it's a prime property, I mean commercial property.
Right. I mean, bought now by private developers.
Yeah.
Or with a view to doing development down there. So we are actively seeking within the Kingston St. Catherine environs additional lands to be able. Because remember, I have another 7,000 units to plan and build out by 2026 or 25, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is something that we are quite aware of. So ideally for us, two things that will impact housing prices. Because if you even build let us say you build a 400 square foot house at $12,000, that is 4.8 million, and I think that is doable. But the infrastructure cost is what drives the price to 8 million.
Well, we're going to be addressing that after we come back from the break.
Right.
I want to thank you for joining us. We have to take the break very shortly. But thank you, Norman, for bringing your perspective and adding value to the discussion. We're going to be exploring with NEPA their own attitude, their own willingness to look at some infrastructure flexibility to facilitate getting that cost down.
Because one of the most crucial ones, Mr. Golden, would be you see the whole aspect, and this is not maybe in a new development, but this is the whole aspect of installing a central sewage system in like the brownfield communities. It makes regularization so expensive that a lot of it is not done.
Thank you, Norman. I'm out of time. I got to go. But thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for assisting us with this discussion.
Welcome, sir. Thank you.
We take the break. We'll be back shortly after when we link with Irish Jam and our listeners in New York. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. We're broadcasting from Kingston, Jamaica. In another couple of minutes, less than 2 minutes, we're going to be linking with our colleagues in New York through Irish Jam, and we're going to then be able to hail up the diaspora in not just New York, but the tri-state area who tune in to Irish Jam. So I want to thank you once again for joining us. Thank you for staying with us, those of you who have been with us. We're going to be talking, we've been talking housing. We've been talking housing solutions. More particularly, we've been trying to focus on the challenge of housing affordability. A lot of people want a house, but how many people can afford the house given the cost of construction? And we're going to be talking now with Mr. Peter Knight, who is the Executive Director of the National Environmental and Planning Agency. They are important people in this thing, because they have a big stamp there that they have to put on development plans before the local authority will even consider it. They provide guidance and they operate on the basis of certain standards that they require. Mr. Peter Knight, do I have you on the line?
You have me on the line, Prime Minister Golden.
Thank you very much.
You also have on the line, under the ways leadership work, you have to be smart. So I have on with me Mr. Dwight Williams, who is our manager, local area planning branch.
Yes.
So Dwight is on. Dwight, say hello to you and your listeners.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Good afternoon, Mr. Bull, and
Good.
good afternoon to your listeners.
May I just say to you, it's opportune that you call. Today is an appropriate day because today is World Town Planning Day.
Is that right?
Yes, and the international theme is planning for intergenerational equity.
Oh, Lord, you're right up my street.
Yes, and we have our own local theme, but that is the big theme celebrated in 30 countries in 4 continents. World Town Planning Day.
Well, let me thank you.
We are pleased to join you.
Well, let me thank you both of us for joining us. Let me tell you where the discussion has been going, because we've been on for more than an hour so far. Do I bring in New York yet? Can I hail up the listeners from Irish? Beauregard, are you there?
Let's join that conversation already in progress with Mr. Bruce Golden at the Bridge 99 FM.
Good, thank you for Beauregard. How is New York?
New York is lovely.
Good?
Lovely.
It don't start get cold yet?
Yeah, it's cold, but it's a mild fall day today.
Okay, what's the winter likely to be? Severe or mild?
It should be severe.
Yeah?
It should be.
You better book a ticket and come home.
I'm looking forward to that anytime.
Yeah, but let me hail up all the Jamaicans up in the New York area. And thank you very much for linking up with us. We're talking housing today. We're talking affordability of housing. Housing is important. Everybody wants a house. But there are so many people, and I'm sure that there are people in New York who face the same challenges. So many people who want a house but have difficulty in affording one. No? So that's what we've been looking at. And we have online now 2 very important people in this discussion. Mr. Peter Knight, who is the Executive Director of the National Environment and Planning Agency, and Mr. Dwight Williams, who is one of his chief lieutenants and who is in charge of, I think, rural area planning.
Local area planning.
Local area planning. Let me put it to the 2 of you. And don't jump down my throat until I finish. When you look at the problem of affordable housing, you have the various components, of elements of it. There's a cost of the land. There's a cost of the development of the land, the survey and the titling. Then there's a cost of putting in the infrastructure, the roadways, the water, the drainage, and so on. Then the cost of building the house. By the time I'm finished showing all of them the components there, my helper said, no, I'm not in that. I can't afford that. So one of the things that we wanted to explore is whether we could look at within the framework of approved development. Because right now what is happening is that people are going out there and doing their own thing because they can't deal with that. They can't deal with what we are requiring. But within a framework of approved development, could we look at that whole development process in an incremental way to say, no, look, here is the land. I'm even suggesting that, maybe for low-income people, and you'd have to be very careful that, people don't take advantage of it, but it's really for low-income. But for low-income people, suppose the government has the land and the government says, well, all right, here's the land. The cost of the land is 0. Let's go in and survey the land. That is going to involve a cost. Let us put in infrastructure, but we're going to allow some specific standards for this infrastructure. Not the curb walls, not the paved roads, but we're going to make sure that there's roadway, there's drainage, there is water, on the basis that the proper development of that infrastructure is something that will have to be done over time. And then once we have got to that stage and we know your boundaries, see your pegs here, we're going to help you build a little something. It may start with 1 room, 2 rooms. Over time, you're going to be able to expand that to where you want to go. Is that something that NEPA would be prepared to examine, or am I heretic and you need to burn me at the stake?
No, Prime Minister. No, you are right up our street, and I say that deliberately. And let me start by just saying, the main objective of development orders that we prepared for the country and for parishes is to meet housing needs through the allocation of a range of sites and units, affordable housing to satisfy the demand of all income groups. And notice I said all income groups, which would include low low-income groups. And it's how you frame the question is as if you were a fly in the wall in a meeting we had with the Housing Agency of Jamaica just last week for looking at some innovative ways of getting low-income housing to communities. We have always had minimum standards. If you look at the development and investment manual, we have a chapter. We included a chapter in that manual that deals with low income. How can we support? And we have been discussing these standards, minimum standards, with the Housing Trust, with the Housing Agency of Jamaica, and with the Ministry of Housing.
What about the local authorities?
Over the years.
Will you or Mr. Williams tell me whether or not the parish councils or the municipal corporations are now, as they are now called, is going to be prepared to give me approval and allow me to get title if I submit a plan that involves some basic mall road, don't have no curb wall, but it have drainage and it have water, in order that I can get some titles for them little poor people them who can't afford the Tapanaris development them? Or they're going to tell me, no, your infrastructure has not reached our required standard.
Well, what I could say to that, Mr. Golden, is that the municipal corporations, the same development orders that CEO Mr. Knight spoke about earlier, the municipal corporations are very integral in the preparation of those development orders. So they would have been afraid and they would have signed off on the policies that would promote low-income housing. I mean, some minimum standards, you mentioned some minimum standards. Once those standards are not detrimental to the residents themselves or the environment, and it is towards the greater good, then I'm sure they would not have any problems in approving.
But Mr. Williams, are they fully on board? Let me tell you, one of the problems, this is a matter I've discussed with some of them, over time. One of the arguments that they put forward, if we were ever to agree to that, then we are going to be into no end of worries now with the people them saying, well, we want asphalt road now, and we want curb wall now, and we want this now, we want that now, and them going to be harassing the daylights out of us, so we're not going to agree to it in the first place. I hope what you're telling me is that has changed.
Well, that is the thinking behind the preparation of the development order, Mr. Woolley, that we realize that not all developments will have all the amenities and all the necessary infrastructure based on the location and based on the persons that you're catering to. So we're not saying that no standards at all, because there are still...
No, you can't do that. You can't do that.
But at least we're saying that maybe we'll allow you some higher building height. Maybe we'll allow you to reduce your open space a little. Maybe we'll allow you to have some flexibility with your plot area coverage. But certainly, we recognize that there are areas that are in need of redevelopment.
What about your road surface?
The road surface?
And what about your curb wall?
The mall may be a little, provide a little nuisance, Mr. Golden.
Nuisance? I want to pin you down, I want to pin you down. Because you know why I'm going in this direction? The alternative to this, Mr. Knight, Mr. Williams, is that if we don't facilitate this kind of incremental development, what's going to happen? Is that the people them going to go squat on the land? Man going to grab a piece here, grab a piece there. And what you're going to have is disorderly development. Let me give you a story. When I was Minister of Housing, one of the settlement upgrading projects that we did was standpipe, what is now known as standpipe. Yeah. The standpipe project took, I don't know, but I can't remember, may have been 2 years, right? But one of the biggest problems we had, in order to put in a piece of road, narrow road, because we couldn't do no 14-foot wide road or 12-foot wide road. Right, but in order to put in a road, we had to basically tear down some people's fence and some people's veranda. And there was one little old lady who refused to allow the development to take place. Peter, I'm not lying to you. I as minister had to go there one day and sit down with her and spend about an hour and make all kind of promises to her. Because we're going to have to take off the whole of her, half of her house would have to come down. But we told her that we're going to build back the house around the backside of the little piece of land that she was on. But that held up the project for almost about 6 weeks.
And that is the correct thing to do.
But what I'm saying is, if we are not prepared to facilitate these, I don't want to use the word substandard, but if we are not prepared to facilitate these incremental based projects, what you're going to end up with is a standpipe situation where people just go and build wherever them can find a little space to build. And then when you try to improve the infrastructure, you run into the kind of problem that I had with this little old lady.
Right, and exactly, and that is why the consultation, which is important, which you should have done before you started the activities. We are strong on consultation, engaging communities to do the necessary explanation and get them on board. You talk about roads and so on. We are prepared to support developments that only have pathways. We discussed that with the Housing Agency of Jamaica just last week. To a way good enough to support removal of waste, good enough for firefighting services, to allow for the sick to be taken out of those communities and so on. When I participated in the discussion on the Housing Trust, the review of the Housing Trust, I made some substantial recommendation as to how we could get improved housing. But it is going to require bipartisan agreement. We have to get our residents, our communities, we have to go in and build and take down these zinc fences. And we have provided the minimum planning standards and requirements, and we just need to get on with it. We are on board. We have many innovative, and Dwight can tell you, we even offer incentives.
But it has, but Peter, it has to be cost sensitive too,
Yes.
Because that's the problem.
Yes.
That is the problem. The problem is with that $12,000, $15,000 a week person. By the time they take out the bus fare and the lunch money and the school picnic, something out of it, there's not much left, and we have to find a way. How can we work with that? In other words, you start with the $12,000 or $15,000 a week. That is what you start with. Don't start with the price of the cement and the price of the steel. Start with that and say, how can we work around it? There may have to be some subsidy element, yes. There may have to be some creative financing arrangements like the generational mortgage, the shared equity mortgage, the graduated payment, because she may not be earning $12,000 a week for the rest of her life. She may be earning $40,000 a week 5 years from now. We don't know. But it has to be cost sensitive. This is what is keeping out so many people from this dream of owning a house,
We agree, and Dwight can tell you about some of the incentives that we have for trying. I must say this, although that's not where you're going. When we came up with the new policy shift about height and density and giving all of these incentives, that was exactly what we had in mind, to provide all levels of society with income. But you know what has happened? We expected to see various areas being built out. But what has happened? Persons have gone to purchase land, and people, the owners of the land have said, well, you're going to get higher density and you're going to... So the cost of the land has skyrocketed also, because people say you're going to get higher density, you're going to be able to provide more housing solutions. And I remember discussing this at the highest level in the country. So you try with an initiative and with a policy to get more housing stock, but then the owners of the land is putting up the price of the land and is defeating the purpose of what you are trying to do.
Yeah, but a lot of the land that we're talking about for the income group that I am concerned about today, a lot of that land is owned by government. They're not in that class. They're not in them.
Well, then the government, then what we are saying also, and which is what Dwight was explaining, what we are saying also, we need the housing trust and the housing agency to get in and to get those housing stocks constructed to provide.
One of the things that I'm glad to hear is that the planners and the regulators, meaning NEPA, are not averse to creative approaches to try to bring home ownership in, take into consideration all of the expensive components, to try to bring that within the reach, if not the grasp, of low-income people. That I'm encouraged for, because at least
yes,
that
and you
gives us,
can't. Remember, you can't be averse because you're talking about environmental management.
yes.
And if you have these locations and if you have these situations, then you're impacting on the environment. When persons have no sanitary facilities, for example, it's not only to look, you have to look at the wider environmental management and how you improve situations in the country. So we have to consider getting persons appropriate housing.
Yes.
One of the things that is placed before us, they are not going to go higher than 4 stories because there's a maintenance issue.
Yeah.
For low income earners.
And you don't have to put in elevators and all them something there.
And elevators are because of the maintenance costs.
Yeah.
But do I say some of the innovative things that we have encouraged?
Sorry, I'm running into a problem, and I'm going to have to run. But
you need to get us when you want to talk.
Yeah. Well, remember you and I had agreed on 15 minutes. I don't want to stress too much on your time. Plus, I'm running into some problem. But let me leave you with a comment, and I don't know if it was his original, but I remember in a discussion once, Carlton Davis, who was then cabinet secretary, said to me that the greatest threat to the environment is poverty. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, but you're damn right.
Yeah.
You're damn right. I mean, it's not, it's not the when you start talking about the hillside erosion and the squatting
poverty and policy.
Poverty is what caused that. And
yes,
therefore,
and policy.
and therefore the solutions that we are addressing can't address that without in isolation of the fact that poverty is something, and poverty is part of what is leading to the inability to afford a house. I want to thank you both, Mr. Peter Knight, Mr. Dwight Williams.
Happy to be on.
From the National Environment and Planning Agency. Thank you so much. We're going to be back in touch with you because this discussion is not going to end today. But we'll be back in touch with you. Thank you so very much. We want to move now to another contributor, somebody who will perhaps bring a different perspective. Miss Gabrielle Grant, who is an attorney at law. She's a development consultant, and she's a real estate dealer. I thought it was important in having this discussion for us to get the perspective of the private sector in the whole housing development effort. Ms. Grant, do we have you on the line?
Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can I put something to you? And don't think that I'm either being disrespectful or aggressive. But we're dealing with a demand for housing that has to be broken down between what is demand based on need and demand based on the effectiveness of that demand, the ability to pay for it. And there is a fairly large cohort of people out there who can't afford anything that is being offered on the market now. I was talking to Norman Brown, for example, from the Housing Agency of Jamaica. And he talks about trying to provide houses at under $8 million. Well, you'd have to get way, way below that $8 million before most of the helpers and the gardeners out there would be able to afford that. Does the private sector have a role in this, or is this an area that, look, private sector has to operate on the basis of you're borrowing money from financial institutions, you're putting it at risk, and you have to make back that money to be able to pay back the financial institution and to make a profit for your own effort. And therefore, there is no way that the private sector can accommodate any of this concern. Or is there any avenue where there could be a partnership between the government and the private sector to address this low-income need for housing?
100%. I definitely think that there is a space for the private sector. Even how the development landscape in Jamaica is generally, you find that a lot of areas or large subdivisions were done by the private sector. So a lot of our planning or development has kind of been left up to the private sector. But I think for us to really hit this affordable housing nail on the head, it will come down to collaboration, and that's on so many different fronts. Collaboration to get that affordable land cost that you were just discussing prior to my coming on to a level that it can make the project viable. Collaboration from a perspective of financing. Collaboration from a perspective of tax incentives, maybe even. All of these things kind of would assist the private sector coming together with the government to be able to provide these housing solutions that we need. So, for example, the NHG has their GPP now, and the GPP prices for I think the smallest unit, which is a studio unit, if I'm not mistaken, the one bedroom starts at about 6.5 and the studio unit is 5.5. So under the GPP program, NHT will pretty much guarantee to buy units from you if you can get them to certain specifications and sell them to NHT at that price. And then they pretty much provide their contributors with housing. So that is one option. But again, that is you pretty much as a developer providing the solutions. But in terms of infrastructure and financing and startup costs, you have to kind of take the ball down the road.
Well, earlier in the program, I was talking with Howard Mitchell, who you probably know, and who is a former chairman of the Housing Trust, and he put out a thought that hit me. He said, and this is going along the lane of trying to see if we can find a point where the private sector and the government and the state institutions could collaborate. He said, let us take an urban area, because this is where a lot of the housing pressure is. People, going to urban areas because they're in search of economic opportunity and so on, and they basically just pack up the place. Yep. If you take an urban area that perhaps is already suffering from disorderly development, squatting and so on, and you were to say to a private developer, look, here is 50 acres of land. It's right on the outskirts of an urban area. This town is rapidly expanding and it needs commercial space. But what we want you to do is, we also need to find some housing space for low-income people. Develop this portion of the land. Put in the basic infrastructure. We're not talking about, elaborate Barber Green roads and sidewalks. We're talking about minimal infrastructure. The access, the basic roadways, which may be, not paved, but cleared. The water supply that you need. The drainage, because we don't want them to be flooded out. In exchange for that, here is your 20 acres of the 50 acres that you can now develop into commercial facilities, with shops and so on, which you can then sell, rent or whatever. But it would be a win-win, because the government would be in a position where it could now provide some housing solutions for that low-income person. The private sector would be addressing a need for commercial space. And the provision of that commercial space would, in fact, create some employment for the very people that you're trying to house in that housing section. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and so to an extent, I know that there are certain frameworks in place now that have the space for that kind of joint venture, public-private partnership kind of collaboration. But what you find is that sometimes these things are a bit tricky because it requires you to kind of go seeking out these opportunities and go and try and put in like a non-solicited bid. For example, these opportunities are not necessarily frequently bidded out to the private sector. So you kind of would have to go in search of it. But what I would say is that in terms of that overall scenario that you just put to me, what is clear there is I think that it all comes back to kind of like area planning, because not only that, but you do have urbanization, but also in more rural areas where you have an affordable cost of land, the land is relatively flat, you have nearby water to bring it to the area, you can also almost build a town from the ground up and provide opportunities for jobs. You know, in the scenario that you gave, the commercial and the residential, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. You know, you build the commercial and then people want to, it creates a demand for the residential in the area. But then, you know, you need more commercial now because you're getting more demand in the residential area. So, for example, a good example of what you just said would maybe even be Fairview in Montego Bay. It kind of has had the effect of shifting the town towards Fairview, where a lot of shops and commercial businesses now have their offices here, and you have a lot of persons looking to buy in like a Reading or a Bogue, which was not necessarily a popular area before. You know, Caymanos Estates in Kingston would be another similar example where you're kind of you're expanding the urban areas more outwards, but you can also create new urban areas. But it definitely, as you said, requires some sort of platform, some sort of medium or a place where we can all come together as development professionals, public and private sector, to plan these things out and get it done. Because that is where I think the disconnect is in my practice or in my career thus far. From the real estate, legal, and now development side of things, that is where sometimes you see the disconnect. But there are persons out there trying to make it happen, but we just, you know, we need more facilitation.
What in terms of the private sector developments now taking place? What's the lowest price point? What is the private sector able to deliver now at a cost-effective basis in terms of low-income housing or affordable housing?
Sure. So one thing I was thinking when you had asked me to come on the show is what are we kind of terming as affordable? Because affordable means different things for many different people, right? I would say that we have affordable from the GPP perspective that I just put to you, which is starting from about $5.5 million for a studio, going all the way up to $10 million for a detached 2-bedroom home. That is pretty much the cheapest I think that private developers have been able to produce housing at. That's what's available now.
Your bottom line is $5 million.
I would say so,
the reason why I wanted to pin that down is because what it would then say to us is that in looking at solutions and in looking at public-private partnerships, what we need to do is to be able to see now how can we create something that provides a solution below $5 million, because above $5 million, the private sector can take care of that.
I have a quick answer for that for you. I think what the GPP currently, we might have a push for units on service lots. I think a lot of Jamaicans, culturally, we really do want our land. We want a house that is standalone on something, right? You need some lawn space. But the most expensive way to deliver 900 square feet of living space is by putting one sewage connection, one thing of sidewalk, one water connection to one lot, right? What the answer to that is really to do density, but we have not necessarily done a good job at density over the years, because you will see where, some of the enforcement in terms of the aftercare, the property management afterwards, how do you keep the amenities good? How do you keep the building looking nice after many years? You see a lot of our apartment complexes not looking so hot. That is the only difficulty. And I mean, just having that paradigm shift in the average mind of a Jamaican where you're using shared facilities, that has kind of been something that needs to be addressed. But certainly, in my mind, if you can deliver a solution that allows for more density, so you're keeping the cost per square foot low, you're keeping it affordable, you're giving them good amenities, right? Whether that be, your gym or pool, shared services, shared green spaces, having important things like the internet, because, even in certain areas, it's a challenge to get internet in. Those things are what really you need to put in support in social services so that these persons can have somewhere to live near to home. This whole idea of persons spending 2 hours in traffic going and coming to get to work, that's productivity lost. And, we really need to kind of think of how can we almost bring more work opportunities to these areas that are more affordable as well.
Well, very useful thoughts. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gabrielle Grant, for joining us. We've been talking housing today, and I'm sure that the listeners would have benefited from your perspective. It was important to hear how the private sector views it, whether or not they say, no, that is for government to deal with, or whether there is room for collaboration. And you're saying to us that there's room where private and public
Ready.
sector.
Give me a call right now.
Yeah, okay. Good. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. We're going to be talking now with Petal James, who is the head of mortgage operations at Jamaica National. Ms. James, do we have you on the line?
Hello, Sir Golding. Good afternoon, I'm most honorable.
Good.
How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. Jamaica National has been, and I say this, I'm not sending you any invoice for this. Jamaica National has been one of the most consumer-friendly organizations in terms of mortgage financing, no?
Yes.
But Jamaica National, of course, is the custodian of people's money. I mean, people save their money with you, or they invest their money with you, and you have to make sure that that money is well managed, and you give them back a good return on their money, no?
Yes, sir.
So those are constraints within which you have to operate.
Mm-hmm.
In talking with, for example, I just spoke with Ms. Gabrielle Grant, who is an attorney, private sector consultant, real estate developer consultant.
Right.
And she said that the private sector basically can't go below $5 million in terms of their solutions. And $5 million, you're talking about a studio unit.
The private sector can't go below $5 million?
They can't produce anything below $5 million.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yes.
And when I spoke with Mr. Norman Brown at the Housing Agency, he says that they are focusing on trying to deliver below 8. So it may be below 8, below 5 for we know.
Right.
But that's a government agency.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to put to you is, has the private sector mortgage institutions been able to find a way to offer a mortgage solution for my helper who may be earning $12,000 or $15,000 a week? Or is she out of it altogether?
Well, both ourselves and NHD jointly provides those mortgage solutions, Honorable Golding. Right now, the NHD offers financing up to $6.5 million maximum, depending on your income stream. And of course, those interest rates go as low as 0%.
All right, let me pause you there. You said depending on your income stream. Let us say that your income stream is $600,000 a year, which is $12,000 a week.
Yes.
What does that income stream qualify me to obtain from NHT and Jamaica National working together? Or is it that you're going to tell me that I don't qualify? Because many people are told that they don't qualify. I spoke with one over the weekend who says I've been contributing to the trust now for 14 years.
Right.
And I apply several times, and every time I apply, they tell me I don't qualify because my wage is too small.
Well, qualification is very relative, and it's relative to the debt that you have. Some of our contributors or members who come into JN we'll have to do a pre-approval to see how much you're qualified for. But it's not just your salary. Your qualification is dependent on two factors. Well, not even two factors, more than one factor, but mainly what your income is and what your debts are.
Mm-hmm.
What we find is that when persons coming to get pre-approved, they have so many debts. And we have been championing since 2018, 2019. Whenever you're ready to buy your home.
Do you mean debts? No. You mean debts other than the mortgage for which they are applying?
Yes, because the institution uses a threshold, of all your debts because we want you to still live. We want you to still live on a monthly basis. You have your children to send back to school. Yes. You have school fees. You have books to. You have bills. You have light. You have the water, and so.
So what? What more? What more you're going to be able to manage?
Right, and so if you coming to us with 12,500, what we have found is that some of our members coming with a lot of debt, a lot of unsecured loans.
But suppose she doesn't have any other debts. I mean, she only has monthly expenses, which is the light bill and the food and the clothes and so on. And she's earning 12,500. By the time she take out the light bill and the food and the clothes, she probably has no more than $3,000 out of that 12,000 for the week. What can that service?
Okay, so 600,000 for the year. You see, that's what you're saying. That's a scenario, right?
$12,000 for the week.
Okay.
And let us say that after she finished with the food and the clothes and the children that have to go to school, all she can find out of that to put aside to service a mortgage is let us say even $4,000 for the week.
Okay.
That is $16,000 for the month. That can't service the mortgage.
So we take a threshold of 50% of that 60,000, and so we're saying 25,000 per annum.
Yes.
Sorry, 25,000 is what she has to pay a mortgage,
yes.
And so that kind of income stream is very difficult to take on a mortgage right now. The most you can borrow, Mr. Golding, is perhaps to buy a piece of land.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be a start. And then maybe she can get some help to put something up on the land. But let me ask you a question. Has Jamaica National or the private sector mortgage lenders have they ever given any consideration to shared equity mortgages where you say to somebody, now look, you're the helper, you're sending the children to school, you can't afford to buy this house now because your little money too small, but your money as small as it is can buy a portion of the house. So what we're going to do, we're going to sell you a portion of the house and we're going to own the other portion on the basis that 10 years time, 15 years time, you have to come with us and make arrangements maybe to get another mortgage to buy out the other portion of the house. By which time, the children that you're sending to school, they come out of university and them can help you to buy out that portion of the house. I remember I tried to entice the private sector lenders to think in that way, as well as the housing trust. I don't know that I got any sort of enthusiastic response, but is this the kind of thing? I know it works in some countries. Is this the kind of thing that the private sector would consider?
That tantamount to the generational lending that NHT looked at. I think it was this financial year.
Yes.
I heard Minister Nigel Clark mention as part of his budget presentation about the generational
what
lending.
About the private sector?
I'm not seeing where it has moved into the direction of our contributors. But just to go back to what you asked earlier about the 25,000, I'm looking at my calculations here, and for someone with age on their side, up to 30 years to repay, perhaps at a 2% interest rate, they could be qualified for at least 6.5 million from NHT using an NHT benefit.
With a
24,000 per month.
With a salary of how much?
Pardon, sir?
With a salary of how much?
That's same 50,000 per month, 12,500. So I'm using only half of the salary, which is perhaps a threshold in the market now, 50% of your basic salary, your gross.
And the monthly payment on that would be what?
Interest rate. Pardon, sir?
The monthly payment on that would be what?
$24,025.27. That's for 6.5 million.
But that would require half of the wages.
Yes, but
she can't afford that.
Yeah, but
she has to buy food.
But
she has to send the kids to school and they have to have lunch money.
Right.
And she has to pay taxi fare to get to work.
True. I know the NHT also offers, loans using your NHT contributions refund.
Yeah.
And so forth. So there are other, augment services that I know the NHT.
Yeah, what I put to you, yeah. I believe, is the maximum that she could go. I said the more she could take out of that $12,000.
Mm-hmm.
The more she could take is $4,000.
Right.
So if you're working some numbers, you have to work around $16,000 a month, not $25,000.
Right. So even the $4 million, Sir Golden, you're looking at $14,000 per month. So you're correct.
Yeah.
I was just looking up to how much she could be qualified for. Yeah, okay. But of course, with her living expenses, somewhere about 3.5-4 million. She'll be looking at 14,000.
Miss James, one of the things that I wonder about, you see, I mean, there are solutions, but for the life of me, we seem to have a difficulty in sort of, connecting up the wires. For example, I saw a figure the other day. Don't ask me to quote it to you because I can't remember what it was. Of the amount of what the value of our pension funds in Jamaica.
Uh-huh.
Now, up to some time ago, some years ago, the pension funds were kind of comfortable, because you had enough government paper that they would wrap up in.
Yeah.
But as we have moved away from that, and less government paper is available, I'm sure that those pension funds have to be scratching their head now to look around and say, now, where can I go and catch in order to be able to make sure that I can meet my pension obligations to the people whose money I am managing, no?
Right.
And it would seem to me that when we're talking about mortgages, long-term, secured with real estate, when we're talking, as you mentioned a while ago, generational mortgages, this is the kind of thing that perhaps we need to do some work to say, now, how can we structure it in such a way that the pension funds would say, give me a piece of that because that suits me and it suits you as well. Win-win. Right?
True. Yes, I agree with you. So there are creative ways that we could, and as you mentioned, the pension fund, how much would have been, invested in our pension. We can use a portion of that, right?
Yes.
And we can do the retirement. We move it upwards,
Yeah.
And so we can use it, to so that we can create some solution. That's something that we could look at as JN, as a player in the market, to so that we can help our members. I mean, you can come with your statement. You may have 12 million in your invested,
Yes.
ready to collect, and so we can use it as a somewhat a collateral, guarantee upfront, to help with mortgage solutions. For sure.
We need to be creative. I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you so much for.
All right, most honorable Bruce Bowling. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. We've been talking housing today, housing affordability. We've been talking about trying to find a way so that the low-income people. I mean, what we've been learning is that housing is expensive, no? I mean, you have some houses now that are being sold for $100 million and that kind of thing. But that is for people who can afford that. But what we're learning today is that in terms of the housing developers out there, the lowest that they can go is $5 million. They can build a little studio unit, which is like a one room with a living dining space, a kitchenette in the corner, one little bathroom. That can hold a family of husband and wife and 4 children, but it is a start. But they can't profitably build anything lower than that. And the fact of the matter is that at $5 million, you're still talking with some people who can't afford that. So we've been really looking to see now what can be done so that you have a little lady who sells on the sidewalk. There's one that I know well, because she's been there for years. I don't know what she earns. I can't tell you. But she's there with our boxes and our basket, and she sells our fruits and our vegetables and our cheese tricks and a little something. She seems to have been doing reasonably well when school was out, and the kids would be among our big customers. I don't know how well she's doing now, but she's still there. But I would venture to think that she perhaps, after a whole day out there, I don't know that she can make more than $2,000 or $3,000 profit. Because after she sells, she has to go buy back the stock. No? And I don't know where she lives. She probably paying rent somewhere. She probably, I don't know. But people like that, how can we find a way so that they can afford them own a door key, a roof over their head? That's what we've been wrestling with today, and we've got some very interesting perspectives on that, which I hope we're going to be able to take further. We're almost out of time, but we're being joined now at the very last minute by Dr. Alwyn Hales, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of, I can't remember what you call it, Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal and Climate Change.
Environment and Climate Change.
Alwyn, why don't give them ministry some simple name that people like me can remember them?
Well, the powers that be feel that every portfolio must be represented in the name, so that there's no confusion or doubt.
Tell me, I had a chance over the weekend to look at the draft national housing policy that was I don't know, it has a 2019 date on it. What is the status of that now? Is that has that been officially endorsed, or is that still in draft stage?
It is still in draft stage, but it is to go back to cabinet for endorsement, and then it's going to be widely circulated as a green paper. So
it has not yet reached any sort of parliamentary debate or anything like that.
No, it's not ready for parliament.
Yeah. I found it interesting. In terms of the extent of it. I also found very interesting, and I'm sure you're familiar with the document, the report of the commission that Minister Nigel Clark, when he was chairman, had initiated at the Housing Trust, which I think provided some very useful information. The program today, the discussion that we've been having, has really focused on, and this I know is going to be a big part of the government's concern and remit. What do we do about those people whose income cannot support the solutions that are currently available, whether through housing trust, housing agency, private sector, joint venture partnerships? How creative can we become? And the question in the very limited time I want to put to you is this. Is the government prepared? And I make no apology, you see, Alwyn, when I say that I am looking at an Operation Pride kind of approach, because I believe the Operation Pride concept was good. I believe its implementation was flawed in many respects. But if we were to look at providing housing for that bottom segment, economic segment of the market, in an incremental way, where we were to say, and I'm just throwing out these ideas, government is a whole heap of land that is there, and if you're not careful before you know it, people go and squat on it and grab it and take it out beyond your control. Suppose government was to put in the land, zero cost. Government was to say, now look, all these fancy development requirements of paved roads and curb walls and all that. No, for this kind of development, for this kind of income level, special dispensation, we allow for basic infrastructure, very basic, access, boundaries that are clearly defined. Over time, we'll have to try and improve that. And we're going to allow for incremental development. So some people can do on their own, if they get that far, they can put up their one room on their own. They may need help to do it. Is that something that is on the table for consideration and discussion?
It is very much on the table, Bruce. There are serious impediments, as you mentioned, for the significant requirements, especially for land that are already registered, just to have them subdivided. So somebody has a piece of family land and they might want to cut it up to accommodate other members of the family. And when you have to go through the NEPA and the Local Improvement Act and the municipal corporations, and they put all of these severe restrictions restrictions that is out of the pocket and out of the reach of
Yeah, but that is what the Alwyn Hales and the governments of this world are for, to kind of find some new way to deal with those things. No?
Precisely. So we're really looking seriously at even the special provisions of the Act having to do with land titling, and we are also looking at what policies we can put in place.
Yeah.
So that we can give people need some kind of security of tenure. But the most important thing, they need land, and they need to be able to build their little. Many instances, these housing schemes that we have that are maybe developed by the NHD and others, and the HAJ, Housing Agency in our ministry, having met those kind of requirements, they start at a very high price.
Alwyn, I'm sorry that I got to you so late because I'm in trouble. They're shutting me down. I'm going to want to take this up with you again. So we're going to be back in touch with you because I think we're at a point now where we're zeroing in on a solution, and I'm excited about it. So thank you very, very much.
Yes, and I'm very happy to continue the discussion and to let you know what we are thinking about in terms of addressing these.
Good, thank you very much. We're really running out of time. So thank you very, very much. And I want to thank all my listeners who joined me today. We're talking housing solutions. I hope you found the discussions useful, even if we haven't sort of nailed down all the solutions yet, but I think we have paved some parts of that road. So thank you very, very much. We'll be back next week Tuesday for another edition of Jamaica Live, Bridge 99.